As a proud Indian, I feel that the way the economy has been growing and the way the country is being developing is it's a very proud moment for all of us. We are living in some wonderful times, and even from an economic perspective, how India is playing a bigger and bigger role year by year globally. And today, poised to be the third largest economy in the world, is a very big feat that we have accomplished. Being an urban expert and looking at the country's vision of becoming Viksit Bharat in the years to come, I think it's imperative that the government in its budget continues to announce policies and makes Capex announcements towards the growth of the cities and urban centers. But having said that, I would also believe that it has to be a balanced growth, which is not just focusing on cities. There's no doubt that the cities require funds, and there have been in the past also announcements made towards urban infrastructure fund, and many such similar large capex announcements have been done. But also these funds have to be focused towards tier 2, tier 3 cities, and also I would say the towns, the thousands of towns in India. We need to develop them also from an urban perspective. So I think Capex, which has grown spending from $1.9 trillion, I would say a decade ago, to today being, or the last budget announcement was more than $11 trillion. So I think that's tremendous numbers that we are looking at. But one expects that even in the budget, I would expect this year, there would be at least a 10% or 15% growth to that number as well, year-on-year basis. So I would say, yes, there is, the announcements in the past and have suggested that there is an impetus from the government towards focusing on urban infrastructure. And that is very important in our cities, which are moving towards a development model. And urban migration continues to be an issue. And therefore, infrastructure in the cities needs to support that kind of a migration as well. While on the one side, we need to have in the budget announcements towards tier 2, tier 3 cities and smaller towns as well, so that there's a more balanced growth of the country and people don't continue to migrate to cities. But currently, the state of our cities is also where funding continues to be required. They are not self-reliant. They are not covered in every aspect as far as infrastructure is concerned. So I think that announcements for urban infrastructure funding, be it direct capex from the government side, or be it other fiscal incentives or financial models involving situations like PPP, etc. I think it requires a mix of all this. But yes, to answer your question, I would say it's imperative that the government increases its spending towards urban infrastructure. So as an urban planner, I feel while the government has been sensitive and has been making year-on-year budget announcements in the last few years, if we see towards improvement of urban infrastructure facilities in cities, I think on ground, at a policy level, the way these budget spends are happening needs a rethink. For example, we keep announcing in the budget, there are announcements towards funding towards metro networks in cities, which is important. But with the metro network, we need to remember that for the metro to be successful, to be universally accessible, safe means of transport, the last mile connectivity is imperative. And that has been missing. Delhi, where one of the first cities where the metro was introduced, continues to see that problem. The last mile connectivity is missing, and other supporting public transport, like having more buses on roads and other public modes of transport, is something that needs to be looked at, and urban funding. But with the funding, I would say the policy implementation is imperative, and that is something which has been missing. From the sustainability angle, of course, if we focus on public transport in our urban mobility programs, then we are doing something which is towards sustainable mobility. But with that, I also feel there are fiscal incentives that the budget can introduce. For example, companies which are engaging in systems where there is low carbon emission that is happening, or the technology that is there in the projects, or projects which are green building oriented projects, these need to be given more fiscal incentives, because this will then, one is for the government to pump the money into climate resilient construction, but the government can only put in that much capex. The other side that the government can help in the budget is by introducing fiscal incentives which encourage people, encourage the private sector also to engage in construction technologies which are more sustainable design oriented. That is another important aspect which I think is easy to do and is missing so far. I think the government has demonstrated tremendous responsibility and vision in terms of announcing in the budget many new kinds of projects, whether it is fast trains, whether it is airports, ports, railway stations, inland water transport, and ropeways, and so on and so forth. Many infrastructure projects across the country have been announced through the budget. A fiscal allocation has been made. But where I see a challenge is that when we go in the PPP model, one sees that the so-called single window clearances, for example, these are only existing on paper. And clearances, statutory approvals do not happen as fast as they should. And this obviously has an bearing on the budget or cost allocations or cost overruns, which also start happening in projects. The second thing is that these projects, when they are announced and construction time period is announced for them also, this is sometimes unrealistic. And fast construction is important, but fast construction at the cost of quality compromise is not a good idea. And many public projects that you will see, which are great visionary projects, so I salute the government for announcing or conceiving of such projects, but the execution has been shoddy. That's not a good idea. The third thing that I strongly feel is that the government has resorted to the mechanism of EPC construction in public projects. And that is not a good idea in terms of building projects, because a building needs to be designed, detailed, engineered, supervised by professionals who are overseeing the contractor's work, which means project managers, architects, urban planners. They need to be involved in the decision making of the project right through. But the moment you make it EPC, you are handing over everything in the hope of keeping a budget under control or keeping time under control. You are handing it over to a construction company, and that construction company then starts doing cost cutting and is not paying attention to quality. So this is a serious concern, and I hope the budget can also, through its fiscal policy announcements, look into this matter and take care of it. I would, as an urban planner, urban expert, I would expect that this government, which has been looking at the aspect of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, has been a very strong, powerful slogan, which is being realized also, and the kind of projects that are announced time to time across the country cover different strata of society, which is something which is very commendable. In that light, I would say that we need to keep in mind that in the mechanism that currently our country has of universal health care, insurance systems, or even the changing social pattern of more and more families becoming nuclear, it is important that the government, through the budget announcement, takes care of assisted and supportive healthcare mechanisms for the different people, including different age groups, including particularly the senior citizens. Therefore, I hope that the budget can also address this issue by giving some kind of fiscal direction towards senior citizen housing, assisted healthcare for senior citizens, healthcare related different requirements which come not just hospitals and medical colleges, but many other R&D centers, training centers, skill development centers, etc. in the sphere of healthcare are important, which the budget, if it addresses it, I think would look towards giving a universal progress and universal care towards society.